Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and it is on this occasion that, well, if you sort of gathered by the title of the video, it should be a little bit about what I wanted this video to be about. But to cut a very long story short, is that today, as I'm recording this, 25 minutes past 2 in the afternoon, UK local time, it's exactly 22 whole years since the September 11th terrorist attacks on the Twin Towers. And they say that everybody knows exactly where they were on the day of September 11th. Now, obviously, I was only 3 years old when the 9/11 terrorist attacks happened, and insofar as actual memories are concerned, probably my earliest memory specifically, well, I'm actually not even going to go over that because it's not particularly relevant to the story, and I kind of wanted to keep things entirely relevant. But I can tell you the story my dad told me about where he was during September 11th. Is that my dad was at a conference at St James's Park, and one of the people that he was in talks with was a man who retired from teaching in about 2010, and they were very good friends because they were working in very similar sort of fields and stuff like that. And it was right about like 4. It must have been either 4:30 or 5 o'clock when when the meeting was over and everyone was heading home. Is that my dad? They were getting my dad and this other guy who I'll just refer to as Mr. O. Mr. O just sort of like turned towards my dad, and my dad said that Mr. O had the sort of he never saw a human face go quite as pale and quite as shocked as the one that Mr. O did. And my dad said that Mr. O had white hair even as far back as 2001. But this was like almost uncanny in how pale and shocked it was, because all Mr. O could say was that something absolutely horrible had just happened. And it was sort of like, he didn't necessarily say what it was, but my dad was sort of like, he said he was walking through the underground car park to get back to his car, and he was like, he couldn't quite work it out. And it took him about like 5 minutes to get out of the car park because back in those days, I don't think he could have got radio reception, because he said he didn't find out until he was actually out of the city and he was traveling towards, well, home basically. And then it just sort of, he was at where the roundabout at Cowgate used to be. Now it's like an intersection and stuff like that. He found out the news that a plane had crashed straight into one of the Twin Towers. And it must have been only like 20 or so minutes afterwards. And then he said literally as he was just like waiting to go down Ponteland Road, then and my dad said he was just passing by a supermarket at that point in his car, and then he said a second plane has hit the second tower. And I think it was like just at the point where my dad got home when he said that it was either the first the one of the towers had collapsed, or that the Pentagon had been hit. And again, this is why, again, I'm referring to the story my dad gave me, because I have like no recollection of what happened at all during this time. I was only 3, and again, I don't even know how I'd have been able to process that sort of it. But as the years went on, and obviously you start to learn about this, and again, just to like move it on just a little bit, the reason why I wanted to do this video specifically is because, honestly, in terms of things I could have talked about in relation to 9/11, there are so many like points of reference. Like, I could have took a look at the actual NBC broadcast, and it was just like a very normal day in New York, and then all of a sudden, at about 20 minutes past 8, the broadcast was interrupted. As they said, they were just had a shot of billowing smoke coming out of one of the towers. And they even said they got like eyewitness reporters or just people from the street who were just on their phones, and they were like in hotels in Midtown, and some just literally evacuating and just walking hurriedly down Manhattan, and people were observing and calling from ferries and stuff like that from Staten Island. And then it just I could have like done like the actual the broadcast that was live, and well, not archived, but just it's obviously still up on YouTube. I could have also took a look at something that I watched about a couple of years ago, which was the actual documentary that PBS did about 9/11, and it's more sort of like the whole thing was sort of like a multi-series about George Bush and about how they went to war in the Middle East, and it touches upon some of the things that Tony Blair, who was the Prime Minister of the UK at the time, but it was mostly about Bush and how he's often referred to as the war president, because he was I can't remember if it was Bush Jr. or it was Bush Sr. who was like a fighter pilot and working for the CIA. I can't necessarily remember the details in full, so I will probably need some help in terms of what things are true or what things are certainly not true. But what I do know is that George Bush was like he was at an elementary school. He was reading to like kindergartners at the time, and then he was just in the middle of reading something, and then a dark suited man just whispered in his ear, and then George Bush had to just close the book and say, "Thank you so much." Did George Bush actually finish the story he was telling the kids, or was it just so, "Thank you very much for your time"? Because yeah, they had to. I don't know if they had to get him to because the White House had been evacuated during this time. Because in fact, I can't remember. Was the White House evacuated before or after the Pentagon was hit? Because I imagine it might have been one of those cases and stuff like that. And again, I could have gone into detail about that, and also about the 2006 film Collapse starring Nicolas Cage, which was explicitly about September 11. I've never seen Collapse, but I imagine I'm not even sure. Like, I'm not even sure about that, to be honest. But what I did kind of want to actually check, because I think it's something of a very strange sort of like retrospective, is this video called "The Day After 9/11," and well, I think we'll just get into it because I want to sort of like talk a little bit throughout, because I kind of wanted to give like, because it's one of the things I feel like let's just get straight to it. Okay. Welcome to United Arts Union Square 14. Today is the day of the movies. All movies will be free today. Stop by the concession stand for a courtesy cup of soda and popcorn. That was nice of them, that they would literally offer everything for free. And I wonder genuinely if it was just like, because and again, this is sort of again why I wanted to do it like this, because it's so, like, just as someone from the UK, it's so incredibly hard to engage the idea that anything like this could ever have happened in the UK. And maybe, I know there's something like the 7/7 terrorist attacks in 2005, but there was also the attack on the Manchester Arena. You may know the story. It was when Ariana Grande was performing in Manchester, and in 2017, and there was a terrorist attack that killed several dozen people. In fact, there was a little bit of maybe a larger story about that. But to be honest, ever since that, the only thing that I can necessarily think to my mind was the terrorist attacks in Paris in 2014, I think, was 2014. That was when there was several explosions, and somebody went wild and killed a lot of people at a rock concert. But it's just it, and I don't quite know what like because what would the response be to such a vast scale of destruction? Because but then again, I also like to imagine the thought of just going on as normal the very next day as though absolutely nothing had happened is just in poor taste, and it's something that literally rocked America to its core. So I think it absolutely makes sense, and did anybody ever go to? If there's anybody out there who actually went to went to a place in New York in Times or Union Square and stuff like this, or even maybe because I wondered, like, did anyone on Broadway do something like this? But then again, I can hardly imagine it was time and place stuff like that. And again, it was something I wanted to point out with the guy who was just sort of it was just sort of between the guy who was playing rope-a-dope earlier and this poor man just sitting here, because it's so incredibly hard to like actually sort of put into perspective what is your response to what has just happened. What on earth are you expected to do? And that's one of the things, again, I wanted to draw attention to. It's the human element in all this is how on earth do you respond? How on earth do you respond to all this death, all this chaos, all this confusion as to why would anyone want to do this? And again, maybe the idea could even follow that this man possibly knew quite a lot of people who were in the World Trade Center. Or maybe, again, it might even not have anything to do with the attacks at all, but maybe this is just someone who was going through an incredibly rough time, and then his entire... You know what? It's again... you could almost use like stuff like this as like a case study about how terrorist attacks physically and emotionally, mentally, how it affects everything, because it's like the old genie in a bottle metaphor, is that once you let the genie out of the bottle, you're not getting him back in, and he can do just about whatever he likes, and there's nothing that could stop. It's just... There are so many things that just come about, and you don't really know how to respond. And also, you don't even know what you can do, if there's anything you can do about it. Which, that's another element as well, is that if there's nothing we could do, then what do we do then? Do we pretend like everything's normal? Do we just go about our business like that guy playing rope-a-dope? Life goes on, but it's hard to engage how you could physically go on, in a sense, because, well, what on earth do you do? What is the response? Why? What was gained from any of this? Let me just turn it down just a little bit. Have the heart to... Look at that here. Have the heart to forgive, and then somebody basically just scrawled never. And again, you have to really understand the fact that as much as people were trying to make sense of it all and trying to understand that, but no, some people, again, people could have lost. How do you say to somebody to move on when hundreds of people will possibly go unavenged? How on earth are you expected to forgive someone who does the unforgivable? And again, it's not even so much that I blame someone for having that reaction, but again, it brings into question Well, what do you expect them to say in a time like this? Us left to much shit go by this must racially as an anti-stop to terrorism. I think that's what it says. I cried, yes, I cried.
A distant ship smoke on the horizon, only coming through in waves. Your lips move, but I can't hear what you're saying.
So this is September 13th, back in Lower Manhattan. People wearing masks. There was even actually a famous shot of somebody, a woman of about like 35, who was covered from head to foot in dust, who died of asbestos a couple of years later, and it was again one of the most like striking things I'd like ever seen in terms of more and more things I learned over the years about 9/11 are just about, and like I said, the after effect. Again, it's this. I'm like almost like struggling to even like face the camera like right now, because I just like, because maybe if I was around like during all this, I'm not entirely sure what to do. I'm like. And even 22 years later, I legitimately do not know like what to think, apart from why would anyone do this? Why? There were innocent people involved. That's a very cute dog, by the way. Again, like even the sky is like ashen because of just the dust and the debris, and God Almighty, like. Broadway looks. I don't think it's Broadway.
They got past the fences, what kind of technology they have to do that? Either they got the same technology or better.
Now, what I actually quite like about all this is that you could see actually the cooperation people were having with the police, and also the police, because I don't exactly know for sure exactly what I don't know if this is just allowing people to safely get into apartments to retrieve stuff, or if they're residents in other places, or again because there was like other buildings as well that were impacted when the towers fell. At least I kind of think that's what this is meant to show. But I think it's actually quite nice that actually everybody has like a lot of patience and cooperation with the police in Lower Manhattan, and just because it's I don't know if it's just because of this video specifically, but it almost even seems to showcase that the best thing we could do right now is try and just get along and just try and make some sort of make things better, not worse. And the only way we could do that is just however we can do it. And again, it was sort of like harkening back to what they showed at the United Artists Day at the Movies before. It's because it just kind of seems like the right thing to do. Is just to because again, what happened was not their fault, but it's their responsibility as well to make things better in some small way. So you're directing traffic. In fact, to be honest, like I was saying again, just if I had to like make any sort of guess whatsoever, this is sort of like, again, the thoughts that sort of like would have occurred through my mind almost throughout all this, almost entirely summarized by this poor man just sitting beside a fountain in what looks like Central Park, just sort of so completely like just in despair, because it was such a despairing, such an absolutely horrific attack. An act of terror, an act of war, and just it could have been whether it was in New York or all the way in LA. It's just the sort of thing that I imagine all across America, probably across the whole world at this point, must have been just thinking to themselves, what do you mean? Because if there was like ever a stage in my life where I think I really should like seriously look into just the whole, because again, I was only like a child when wars were raging across the Middle East, and remember, I was a teenager virtually during the beginning of the Syrian civil war, and unfortunately quite a lot of like the nightmarish imagery of some of the reports, because some of the things that happened during the Syrian civil war were so unbelievably appalling that I don't think even trying to describe them with any sort of like describing them at all is going to be like a minefield and a half. But I can't in good conscience think about doing that, because I can't work it out either. Some things I just can't do it. And I do know that at Ground Zero right now, there's a number of plaques which commemorated all those who had died, who were those who were in the towers, everybody who died that day. And again, you probably don't, I'm not even going to think about showing the footage either, but you all know that there's plenty of footage out there of people who are obviously just leaping from the towers just to get away, and good Lord. To be honest, I think falling to your death is simply a dreadful way to die, because in amongst all that chaos, all that horror and despair, there must possibly come a moment where all hope is so incredibly lost that there was no alternative, and the final few seconds that might rush through a person's mind probably are not even worth not so much considering, because how on earth could you even process something like that? Free falling for maybe 7 seconds and then nothing. And I do know as well that there were like people from across the world who were at the World Trade Center at that time, and I do know that there was one woman who lives lives in Durham, who was the closest to where I live in terms of who was actually at the World Trade Center. And I don't know right now if it's just my own blatant ignorance or whether or not I'm like so incredibly like struck dumb in terms of how do you process anything that was a result of 9/11. But I think the best way to possibly end this is just, again, eternal rest granted to them, O Lord, and may your paternal light to shine upon them. May they all rest in peace. Amen. Maybe that's the only real way is to remember the dead. In fact, I even considered this for such a long time. I was almost considering, actually, I didn't even realize, you know what, I'm going to do a take 2 on that. Just 1 second. I know it may be a little bit early, but to be honest, when it comes to like things like remembering the dead or remember what the dead should be remembered for, there's no other real time than to wear a poppy, because it's become a symbol of remembrance of the innocent dying, and the innocent suffered along with the guilty. But there's no guilty party apart from the cowards that did this. So allow me to do a take 2, because I want to do this with some level of pride. Eternal rest granted to them, O Lord, and may your paternal light shine upon them all. May they all rest in peace. Amen. And with that being said, take care of yourselves, ladies and gentlemen. That is all.